Hello, my name is Janel Scharhag. I'm currently with Wildlife Services Hawaii, but today I'm going to present a chapter of my thesis research from the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point on human-bear conflict risk management. So the thesis includes two data-driven chapters, and I have presented the data in chapter 2 at several conferences and workshops in the past. So today I'm happy to finally present chapter 3 on bear manager perceptions of attack risk management. Instead of focusing on the actual conflicts, attacks, or injuries, this chapter focuses on how agencies address that risk. And in general, injuries and fatalities from Black and brown bear species have been increasing. With this, lawsuits against these agencies have also increased, which has led to a call for a better way to assess the risk of an attack. When we're talking about legal issues, we want to ask the question, who's in charge of preventing a wildlife attack, if anyone? And what agencies are in charge of managing wildlife? Primarily, state wildlife agencies are the executors of wildlife management. In general, federal agencies don't have authority over wildlife, with the exception of two agencies, and that would be the National Park Service and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And regardless of their differences, they all have similar responsibilities to mitigate and communicate the risk of dangerous or potentially lethal wildlife. So for some background, how are agencies currently managing that risk? In general, they're responding to bear behavior. So are they seeing bears that are habituated, food conditioned? Are they seeing property damage? Or are people reporting aggression, either offensive or defensive aggression? And then how do they respond to that risk? The number one thing is preventing these behaviors from happening in the first place. So things like managing attractants and educating people. And when they do see a risky behavior, then they can communicate that risk. They can place warning signs and they can hand out information to educate people. But they can also go through direct control. And that includes things like trapping, translocating, hazing, and even killing. I want to take the time to highlight the case that really sparked the call for a better way to assess risk management. And this is when 11-year-old Samuel Ives was killed by a black bear in Utah in 2007. Briefly, what happened is a bear raided a camp and inflicted minor injuries on a camper the night before Samuel was killed. The state was then called and determined that that bear that had inflicted the minor injuries should be killed. So they responded, searched for the bear, but were unsuccessful. They left that night and were going to come back the following morning. However, after they left, the Ives family camped at that same site. And in the middle of the night, the bear dragged Samuel from his tent and killed him. This incident occurred on U.S. Forest Service land, and the state responded because they are in charge of managing wildlife on U.S. Forest Service land. The family, after this incident, did sue the Forest Service and were awarded $2 million, and they settled out of court with the state. So this is the first case that we can find that was not settled out of court, where a lawsuit went through the court system and ruled against an agency. And this really made agencies and bear biologists nervous and led to this call for a better way to reduce risk. One of the things that has been suggested to reduce risk is the creation of a risk management model. There are several popular models that are used in all kinds of industries. So they're used in search and rescue, firefighting, finance. And the question is, would bear biologists like to use this? So our objectives are to assess if bear managers would like to use this type of model and what type of model they would find most helpful. Identify what they view as the primary challenges to bear attack risk mitigation, and understand their perceptions of attack risk management. We had some predictions, And we believe that federal managers would be more likely than state managers to support the use of a model. We believe that less experienced managers would also be more likely to support a model, and that managers who perceive high amounts of human bear contact within their jurisdiction would be more likely to use a model. And to answer these questions, we use two methods, a survey and a focus group. The survey was a 25-question, self-administered, emailed survey targeting bear managers and biologists in both state and federal agencies across the United States. The focus group was to add qualitative depth to the same information obtained in the survey and was conducted at the 5th International Human Bear Conflict Conference in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. And we wanted to determine how a manager's agency type, their region, their experience, and how often they perceived humans and bears came into contact in their jurisdiction affected their likelihood to use a risk management model, the favored model type, and their perceptions of litigation, responsibility, and policy. The three models we proposed in the survey are one, a quantitative model. So this would be some numerical assessment of the probability of an attack. Two would be a qualitative model, and this would be more akin to a decision tree where you would go through different scenarios and come to a recommendation. And the third was a mixed model. So to start with a calculation of risk followed by a recommendation. The survey questions were mainly 5-point Likert scale, but also included multiple choice, a slider bar, ranking, and free response questions. The focus group questions were designed to collect the same information that the variables in the survey collected. And to score, we took all the dependent variables as a rate of the total possible points of the questions they answered, which gave us a score between 0 and 1. Where the closer 1 is, someone that is more supportive of a risk management model views themselves and their agency as more responsible for preventing an attack, is more in favor of the use of litigation against an agency, and agrees with their agency's policies more. For the independent variables, they were the response to just one question, with the exception of experience, which was a combination of 4 questions, also given as a rate of the possible total, but then categorized as low, medium, or high, because we wanted the independent variables to be in categorical form. For the analysis, the survey, we used a content analysis, Pearson's correlations, and a one-way ANOVA. For the focus group, we used content analysis and a micro-interlocutor analysis, which is a formalized method to study focus group responses. In total, 121 surveys were sent, and by the end, we had 55 complete and usable surveys. We had a mix of agency type, region, contact, and experience. We saw good representation in the West, Southeast, Northeast. But in the Midwest and Alaska, we were missing a high number of state responses. And in the Southwest, we were missing federal responses. Overall, the experience of the survey responders was majority low, with then about a mix between medium and high experience. And how often those managers thought humans and bears came into contact. The most common response was multiple times a day, with a mix of the other possible responses. In the end, we did find that federal managers were more likely than state managers to support the use of a risk management model. We also found that managers with less experience were more likely to support a risk management model. And this followed our predictions. Overall, managers were moderately supportive of a risk management model. And overwhelmingly, they preferred the qualitative model. We also found that several of the variables were correlated, so that the more responsible they thought themselves and their agency were in preventing an attack, the more in favor of the use of litigation against an agency they were, and the more likely they were to use a risk management model. And also, the more they agreed with their agency's policy, the more in favor of the use of litigation they were against an agency. The challenges of attack risk management, most commonly listed, were human behavior. So biologists felt that they could not control human behavior, especially risky human behavior, such as a person getting too close to a bear, trying to pet a bear, trying to feed a bear. All are some of the common things that managers have to deal with, as well as attractant management. So despite education and regulations, it's still really challenging to get people to secure their food and their garbage and their other attractants. Other things that were listed were lack of their own agency support, and then unpredictability. So unpredictability of the bear's behavior and the unpredictability of each situation, as well as this dichotomy of trying to communicate that the risk of an attack is real, and at the same time communicate just how low of a risk that is. Moving on to the focus group, we had 13 participants. 7 were state employees and 5 were federal employees, representing 2 agencies and 5 states. We had good representation from the Southeast, the West, with fewer representation from the Southwest, Alaska, and Canada. The conference was, however, held in the Southeast, so we expected more representation from that region. The experience level in the focus group was high. We had 7 of the 13 had experience with injuries and 5 who had experience with fatalities, and a combined decades of experience with bear management and bear biology. Overall, in the focus group, managers were skeptical of a risk management model, and this is likely due to the high experience of the group. And a couple of quotes I think are helpful in showing this. So, as a federal agency, we are a big target for lawsuits. And we wouldn't like very specific protocol like that, because if you varied from it, you are wide open to a lawsuit. So the fear that the model itself would create a litigation hazard. And then anytime you try and come up with some kind of chart or matrix or something like that, you really run the risk of oversimplifying the situation. However, there was a need, a discussion that there was some kind of need. And this is apparent with the statements, a progression chart or something I can hand to our officers, to me, is more to help our field personnel that aren't as experienced. Or even though you don't want a prescription, there are some consistent questions you ask yourself on a case-by-case basis. So I think a structure where you list what are the questions I consider when evaluating this is useful. There was also the difference between state and federal managers in the focus group that also showed up in the survey, particularly differences in the way they responded to similar situations. So from a federal manager, almost all of our attacks are defensive aggression. If we can clearly show it's defensive aggression, we don't take any action against the bear. We close the area, and we have not ever had a repeat incident from one of those bears. Then in response by a state manager, what I heard from the federal agency scares me, that we let animals go that have already made contact with people. Our experience is a habituated and food conditioned animal that you can't scare off is one that's going to hurt somebody. So the takeaways, what can we learn from both the surveys and the focus group? Overall, we saw moderate support of the risk management model in the survey, and then cautious support of the risk management model in the focus group, likely due to the high experience of the group. We saw that the qualitative model was overwhelmingly favored, and there was almost no support for a quantitative model, which I think shows a distrust for a calculation of something that can be so subjective or ambiguous. We saw the differences between state and federal management, particularly where states were less tolerant of habituation and defensive behavior, and that so the different responses by the agencies to a similar situation. We did have some limitations. We were unable to survey one of our targeted federal agencies, which skewed the survey results to one federal agency and increased our sampling error. We also had some challenges in the focus group where responses vary greatly. And by this, I mean, some people talked a lot and some people didn't talk at all, hardly. So we suspect that introverts or people of dissenting opinions may not have felt comfortable speaking up. And we can use this information to create a future risk management model. And we think any type of future model should be qualitative or mixed, be targeted to less experienced staff, incorporate differences in agency type, address the common challenges listed by managers, and importantly, be general and broad. So nothing that prescribes a specific or mandatory action, as this was one of the main concerns brought up in the focus group. Okay, well, thank you very much. I would like to acknowledge my advisor and my committee members, also the people that assisted the university and the Oscar grant, all the state and federal participants that helped with the survey and the attack data collection, as well as a host of bear biologists across the country that helped with various aspects of my thesis. Thank you so much. And I would like to leave this with a popular Facebook meme that I think has already got a good start on the creation of a future risk management model. So I think we can just start here and take it from there.